faces ingredients that she doesn't know how to use, or meals that take away any sense of pride for her. So that's the problem. This person wants to walk in a store and be inspired. So then you take a look at somebody like Kraft. Kraft, I worked on the Kraft one time, and one of the sessions I had with them was 32 people locked in a room for a day to focus on writing a creative brief for a product which was shredded cheese in a resealable bag. I mean, after 5 hours of meetings, this guy stood up and he said, hold on a second. Does she, the target audience, have a fire in her belly, or is she passionate about her product? And I went, oh, for fuck's sakes. And my boss said, get your game face back on. I said, has anyone tried this product? What are you talking about? I mean, you could not believe, the idea of the consumer was miles away from this, from that discussion. And then you look at Loblaws. So here's an example. So you talk about what people want. Here's a company that's putting a product on the shelf. I don't even think there was any cheese in that cheese product, by the way. And then you look at Loblaws. So Loblaws is about a $45 billion company. The people who own that own Selfridges and they own Fortnum & Mason. I asked this executive vice president, I said, I'm just going to ask a blunt question. I've worked with Procter & Gamble, Unilever, Kraft, all kinds of guys like that. I said, just blunt, why does so much product on the shelf suck? He said, because food companies don't know anything about food. I was like, what? He said, they know how to get more out of their supply chain, but they don't know anything about food. They don't taste food. I thought, that was the first time I'd heard that. Remarkable. I mean, I've worked with these guys for years, but if you haven't worked with them for years, when you stand outside their offices and you see these megalithic companies with these brand names, you think they're so smart. They're not that smart, trust me. So if you look at story number 2, so here's where the problem starts. I was brought into a team. Metro's a multi-billion-dollar company. It's a grocery chain. I was brought into that group to help lead what they refer to as the store of the future. Store of the future was basically experientially supposed to be a game changer in the way shoppers perceive them. So I started out by interviewing the executive team. And by the way, CEO, Harvard MBA grad, so smart guys. So there's 15 executives, 14 of them are men, average age 48, none of them shop with their wives. And the number one shopper, the high value segment, is women. So these guys never go into a grocery store and actually, I mean, think about it. If you've ever taken a flight, do you think any of those airline CEOs actually get in line and go through the economy line and see what that experience is like? No, they don't. And it's the same in a grocery store. And so at the end of 15 interviews, I said, okay, you are the guardians of this mission. What is your business fundamentally about? They said, 2 people said food and 1 person mentioned women at the end of 15 interviews. That's where the problem starts, is that you become more focused on what the business is and less focused on who the business is for. And then third, House of Fraser. So what ends up happening is you end up, all of these people around a table, all really smart, all making a lot of money, all protecting their bonuses, and you lose sight of what's important. And so speaking to the group at House of Fraser, the really interesting thing was they said, we are desperately trying to be positioned as a premium department store. And in some parts of the country, they are a premium department store. They said the problem is, in the year that I interviewed them was last year, I think they said there was something like 4 weeks in the year where they were not on sale. So they said, so we're trying to be positioned as premium, but every time you walk by our stores, it says on sale. And on sale is the last refuge of undifferentiated brands. Like a brand that never goes on sale is Apple. Apple's that company that tells you that a laptop's worth £1,000, not £300, which is what Dell tells you. That's the power of a brand. That's the power of clarity. So, selling yourself cheap becomes a factor when you are not differentiated, when you've lost your sense of purpose. So the third set of stories quickly. So client I worked with, HTC, said, this is a sophisticated company. It's a global company. They've got all the access to all the market research and data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They said, we sell our product through 3,000 stores in Germany, and we have no idea what's happening in those stores. None. So, in fact, what happens to the stores, and I'll probably touch on this more about later, is the fact that the brands, because they don't know what's happening in the store, they can't control the outcome. And so what they tend to do is they over-rely on what the retailer can do. In this case, if you look at the Mars example, I met with these guys a couple of weeks ago. They say, we invest heavily in television. Well, I can tell you television, I'll talk about it later. Television actually is not that effective at reaching people, particularly if they are behaviorally inclined to shop in a certain way for certain categories. So Mars says, what we do is we just buy what's available in the store and hope it works. Can you measure it? No, they don't. What's the cost of that? Well, for 4 weeks in Tesco, it's 400,000 pounds, and you can't measure it. Do you know if it works? Well, I've done the point of sale strategy for Waitrose, and I can tell you most of what is in a grocery store doesn't work. So these companies then are relying on strategies because they've always been done that way. And then the final one is Walls, owned by Kerry Foods, sausage brand. You guys probably know it. So I recently interviewed a very senior marketing person there. They said, you know, we spent a couple million quid in an ad campaign and it didn't sell a sausage. And I said, why is that? They said, well, you can buy a better sausage. I said, well, why don't you make a better sausage? We can't afford it. What are you going to do then? You're going to keep advertising in a way that doesn't work? And this is what happens to a lot of companies. These are the best companies, these are the brightest people in the industry, and these are the guys that you're going to go up against. So I encourage you to go forward with confidence, but just follow my advice. So what ends up happening is they end up taking on, you know, you've heard this, I just am so sick of this. I think this is the biggest pile of BS is big data. And the reason I think it's BS is because you can't pay attention to small data in most of these companies. This guy, who's an essayist and an academic, he said, as we acquire more data, we have the ability to find more statistically significant correlations. As a planner, I love that stuff, by the way. The problem is the haystack gets bigger and the needle is still tucked deeply inside. So big data is also not a friend to these companies, but that's a reality. An interview with a chap recently who's worked for years with Coke, they said, we're now at a point where we have so much research that we can argue both sides of every situation. So imagine a group of guys that walk in a room and say, damn it, we've got to do it this way. Somebody across the table says, well, I've got a piece of research that says you shouldn't do it that way. What do? And now what's Coke's problem? Coke is losing ground to challenger brands regularly. And their response, which is good for you guys, is they buy the best challengers. So something to look forward to. So here's the issue. Large companies suffer from myopia. Don't be like that. Companies often say, there's a study done by McKinsey a few years ago in the United States that showed directors, the majority of them, invested in programs they knew didn't work, but they did it anyway because that's the way it's always been done. Don't do that. And they do it out of fear. You know, if you're somebody that's making a lot of money and you've got 40% of your base salary in line, you do not want to screw up. And the easiest thing that you can do is follow the leader. And this is, to me, this is why you'd want to be an entrepreneur. Because as I said at the outset, these guys can be taken. This is your opportunity. So what I'd encourage you to remember is your battle is going to be won or lost before you write your business plan. I guarantee you. 75% of new product launches from major FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods, 75% of new launches from these businesses fail. You think to yourself, how can you fail? When you've got a team of guys, market intelligence, marketing budgets, distribution, how do you lose? You lose by losing sight of what's really important, and that's the customer. And what I say is, they all have business plans, and they still fail. The really important bit is the thinking that you put in defining your purpose, defining your brand, and your expression right now. So I'm going to talk about very quickly the evolution of channels. Basically, this is really from the Mad Men era. Post-war, people have got newfound wealth. They're looking to fill their homes. They're looking to buy cars. And this is the heyday of brands. The heyday of people believing and being excited by brands. Interestingly, you see a similar mindset in developing markets right now, where people are less familiar with brands. So places like China and Russia, people still believe and are excited by brands. Here, most people, research says, they don't want a relationship with a brand because they've seen it and done it. By the 80s, what happened was advertising, this was when it was at its peak. You could run an ad on a couple of channels and you'd reach 80% of your audience. It was really simple then. Basically, people didn't have a choice. They get excited by something, big production values. They had one place to go and buy it, and that was a store. It was a very simple thing. And then this guy came along and he ruined it for everybody. Tim Berners-Lee created the internet. That's the first page that was ever posted. That's the reality right now. I remember 1995, I had clients who said, do I really need a website? And I can tell you right now, I started in the industry at a time before websites, and what happened then is, really when the web started to take off, is suddenly people could find out whether what they were being told was honest or not. They could find out if their whites were going to be made whiter, if that hotel was really as good as it said it was, or whether you in fact are poisoning the environment. And so the internet has changed the game for everybody in terms of what people are willing to believe. I worked with Nokia for a long time at a global level, You know, and if you think about that business, in some markets they had 70% market share. Where's Nokia today? You know, and a lot of that is just driven by the proliferation and interest of Apple globally has just taken these companies out. And the internet, again, can diminish a brand very quickly or build a brand just as quickly. Then we've got this, of course, the evolution of mobile.